This is the new ZimaCube 2, the next version of the compact home server and storage system from Icewhale, which at first glance looks very familiar to the ZimaCube 1 that I already reviewed here on this channel when it came out. And the ZimaCube 2 comes in almost the same case now, with just a different color option. But it has still a few interesting upgrades inside. Icewhale now calls this a true self-hosting powerhouse, and that also was the reason why I turned it into my new third Proxmox node that I'm actively running in my cluster right now. Full disclosure, it was sent to me by Icewhale for making this review video, but of course, as always, I'm gonna share my honest and humble experience with you. I'm gonna tell you what actually changed in the ZimaCube 2 and whether it makes sense to upgrade, especially if you already have a ZimaCube 1 or maybe a similar NAS or home lab server. So let's get started. As you can see, you can already buy the new ZimaCube 2 from the official ZimaSpace shop. And just like the ZimaCube 1, it comes in two different versions, the standard and the pro version. And there's also a creator pack that includes more memory, a dedicated graphics card, and so on. But honestly, guys, what caught my attention here is the standard version, because if you compare that to the original ZimaCube 1 in the standard version, this one used an Intel N100 chip, and that chip only had 4 cores and 4 threads in total, so it's a very efficient system. But honestly, my real-world experience with this chip wasn't so great at all, because of the low speed and the 4 cores. That changed a lot because they upgraded to an Intel i3 1215U, which is a much better chip that comes with 6 cores and has a better single core performance that can boost up to 4.4 GHz. And that of course matters a lot in a home lab. Now you get much more performance to run any workloads like containers, virtual machines beside your storage system. So basically the stuff that runs all the time in a small home lab, and it's certainly much more capable of doing that. If you compare some of the benchmarks on Geekbench for the Intel N100 chip, the i3 chip in the ZimaCube 2 standard, this gives you more than double single core score and almost 3 times the multi-core score. Of course, the Intel i3 also consumes a bit more power than the Intel N100, but in my opinion, it is still a better deal because this is a mobile chip that is still very efficient, but the power, the performance you get from this, according to these benchmarks, that gives you a much better value in my opinion. It also improves a lot the memory options on this device. The Intel N100 chip was very limited when it came to memory. It was only upgradable to 16 gigs of memory. Now the ZimaCube 2 standard comes with 8 gigs of memory, but it can be upgraded to 64. So if you want to use the ZimaCube as a home server, I think this is an important upgrade that makes the standard ZimaCube 2, in my opinion, probably the most reasonable choice here, because this one got the biggest upgrade. However, if you even need more power for your home lab, you can also get the ZimaCube 2 Pro, which by the way does have the same chip as the previous generation, the ZimaCube 1 Pro used. It's still the Intel i5 1235U that has 10 cores and can also boost up to 4.4 GHz. They also upgraded what the system storage. Now both the standard and the pro version have a 256 gigs NVMe SSD. I think the ZimaCube 1 standard only had 128, but this is only the standard that comes with this device. Don't forget, you can always upgrade because you got an additional NVMe slot on the motherboard and also the NVMe expansion card at the front of the device that gives you another additional 4 M2 slots, with just one small caveat because the standard version still runs them on lower speed. But I think for a smaller home lab, this is still great because you can use this device to get both. You can use the SATA drive base for large hard drives, backups, and media storage, and then use NVMEs for fast VM disks, containers, cache, or smaller high-speed storage pool. You got plenty of upgrade options for fast storage, while you don't need to make compromises on the drive base. And again, if you want full performance, then just go with the Pro version that runs the additional NVMe card on 3200 megabytes per second read and write speed, but I think 800 megabytes per second read-write is still great. It's still faster than using SSDs. In my opinion, this is enough for a small home lab. For magnetic or solid-state drives, the ZimaCube 2 has also 6 SATA drive bays, which you can of course use for redundant storage with ZimaOS or even with your own operating system. Run Proxmox, TrueNAS or whatever. By the way, don't worry, we will talk about operating systems as well in a minute. For networking, you also got two 2.5 gigabit Ethernet in the standard version and an additional 10 gigabit Ethernet port on the Pro version. However, a small tip from my side, if you want to go with the standard version, but you still want to have a faster network speed, you can easily just use one of the two PCI Express slots on the motherboard and add in a low profile 10 gigabit network card. That's, for example, what I've done, and it works completely fine. That gives you a much faster network speed, even on the standard version. And by the way, speaking about PCIe expansion, there are two PCI Express slots on the standard and on the Pro version. One that runs 4 lanes with PCI Express 4.0, physically an X16 slot, and a PCI Express 3 with only 2 lanes though. That is an X8 slot. And of course, it also has other interfaces like Thunderbolt 4. It has 2 USB-C ports that support Mac or PC direct connections if you want to put this thing on your desk and use it for storage. And you got additional USB-A and C port, DisplayPort, HDMI. The other stuff feels very familiar. And honestly, this is really good thing because I liked the ZimaCube 1 a lot. So that's why I also love that they just kept the original design. They just changed the color of the standard version, maybe to have a more consistent design across the Zima board to line up that goes well with this apple gray material. Unfortunately, it still has this cheap drive bay cover that I already didn't like on the first ZimaCube. Apparently, they didn't listen to my feedback to change that one, or maybe it just wasn't worth changing. Anyways, I mostly just leave this cover off all the time so it doesn't hurt the functionality. I'm okay with it. By the way, the rest of the case and the build quality is, at least in my humble opinion, really good. There are no sharp edges and everything else feels worthy. The fans are quiet, so you can literally put this thing on your desk next to you and it's not distracting or anything. So, to summarize, the ZimaCube 2 doesn't really feel like a completely new device, more like the next logical iteration of the same package, with some minor improvements here and there, maybe some bigger ones to the standard version than to the Pro version. The only downside of this is that they also increased the pricing. The standard version of the ZimaCube 2 now costs around $800, which is $150 more than the original ZimaCube 1, and the Pro version costs around $1,300. That is $200 more than the original ZimaCube 1 Pro. So it has become a bit more expensive. However, that is also expectable because of the memory and disk prices that recently exploded. So maybe that's because of that, but honestly, I don't really know. That's just my personal guess. Anyways, I still think the ZimaCube 2 in the standard and the Pro version is still a great deal. It's a great all-in-one home lab server package that gives you a lot of expandability. My favorite is the standard version, honestly. And by the way, you can also get an additional $50 off with my discount code. You will find it in the description, so make sure to use this. But yeah, that's my opinion about the upgrades in the ZimaCube 2. Now, we of course also have to talk about the operating system. As most of you guys know, I've used ZimaOS before. I've also made a review, especially in the early days, when I honestly wasn't the biggest fan of it. The idea was great, but it was in the early days missing a few things that I personally would have expected from a NAS or home lab operating system. But to be fair, ZimaOS has improved a lot over the last years, and they added really critical features like redundant storage pools, better disk overview, the file manager improved a lot, network settings are solid, there is SSH and remote access, there's an app store for running self-hosted applications and running Docker containers, there's also peer drop for quick local file sharing, and of course advanced backup features that make it now feel more like a complete personal cloud system. And I honestly believe if you really want a simple all-in-one experience where you just buy the ZimaCube and you put this thing on your desk. Maybe you want to host a few files, maybe run a few workloads containers, and you want to have everything in a nice web interface. Then the ZimaCube with ZimaOS makes a lot of sense. But they also added one thing that feels a little weird, because now there seems to be something called ZimaOS Plus, which is a lifetime license that unlocks additional features on ZimaOS, including support for more than 4 disks and more than 3 users. And this is where I honestly have mixed feelings about, because on the one hand, it really just costs $30 a lifetime license, which is not a huge amount of money. And to be fair, there are other NAS operating systems that also have paid licenses. But on the other hand, it still feels a bit weird that if you buy a device like this that has 6 drive bays, and then some part of the software experience is limited unless you buy another license, that is a bit confusing, especially if you just bought a device for more than $800. So yeah, that's just my opinion. But of course, you're not forced to use ZimaOS or to buy the additional license at all. You can still run and install any operating system on the ZimaCube 2, such as TrueNAS, Proxmox, or other Linux distributions. So that's, for example, what I've done. I've installed Proxmox and added the ZimaCube 2 as a 3rd node in my cluster. By the way, I've also made a video about this that you can find in the description, so check that out if you want to hear more about how to run a Proxmox cluster. And this is what I'm using to run any containers or virtual machines, and I think this device is really perfect for that use case, because I can still run a lot of workloads with the upgraded Intel i3 chip. I haven't done a full benchmark on this because honestly, there are already existing benchmarks out there and they all look quite similar. So I don't know what would be the point of running a benchmark. I've just measured the power consumption when I'm using this, and in my use case, I'm using it with 5 hard drives, an additional 10 gigabit Ethernet network card, 2 NVMEs, and my regular setup running Proxmox as the operating system. Here my idle power consumption is around 50 to 55 watts. Without the VMs and the hard drives, it's around 26 to 30 watts. However, I'm still running this with the additional PCI Express network card, so that might also take like 4 or 5 watts. And I didn't really tune any BIOS settings, like setting C-states, power efficiency mode, and so on. So maybe you can get it lower to about like 20 watts, probably. So that's overall the experience that I kind of expected with this package, and I think it is great. But honestly, just as a side note, power efficiency, in my opinion, is becoming less important, because we are at a point here where most of the modern hardware for home lab servers are getting more and more power efficient, especially with all of the mobile chips, the AMD Ryzen CPUs, and also the Intel i3, i5. These modern chips are all great in my opinion. And there are not these big jumps and gaps that we had 4 or 5 years ago. So that's why I'm paying, honestly, a lot less attention to power consumption of specific devices these days. But again, if we come back to the topic and try to answer the question, so should you upgrade to the ZimaCube 2? Should you actually buy it? My short answer is, it depends. Sorry, who would have thought that? But the fact that I started using this as a real production device in my Proxmox cluster should tell you that it certainly is worth an upgrade, especially if you only had the standard version of the ZimaCube 1 that was fairly limited because of the Intel N100 chip, or when you were running an older or less capable NAS device and you're looking for this great all-in-one home lab server package that combines computing power, power efficiency, and storage and expandability. There are many use cases for ZimaCube 2. At the end, of course, it is your decision and if that use case fit your setup. But I hope I gave you all the metrics that you need to make a decision for yourself. Again, you will find the links to buy this thing in the description. Check them out. And of course, don't forget to give this one a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more home lab videos. So that's my opinion about the ZimaCube 2. Thanks everybody for watching. Of course, I'm going to catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye.